I was westbound on I-10 two nights before Thanksgiving, hauling a busted ATV to a ranch near Fort Stockton and trying to beat a storm that the radio swore was crawling up from the Big Bend. It was one of those long, wide Texas dusks where the sky looks like it's stacked in slabs rust violet, then a hard band of navy, and the wind is steady enough to drum the trailer straps like a lazy finger snap. I'd left Arizona after topping off and grabbing a styrofoam cup of coffee that tasted like cardboard and hope. The plan was simple. Keep it at 65, let the radio talk shows keep me company, and hit the ranch by 10. Nothing about the evening felt wrong until the mile markers started lying. I noticed it the way you notice a toothache, not all at once, but as a dull attention that keeps returning. The first marker I clocked was 292, then 291, then 290, ordinary. I took a sip of coffee, rolled my neck, watched the shimmer of heat left over from the day float above the asphalt. When I lifted my eyes again, the reflector flashed 294. I blinked, told myself I'd missed one, that my brain had skipped. The night gets big out there, and it can play tricks if you let it. But a few minutes later, I saw 295. I wasn't going backward anymore. I was slipping. I slowed to 60. The highway emptied. High beams caught a tumbleweed that skittered like a chicken. Coyotes yipped somewhere off in the mesquite, and my coffee was doing nothing to keep my hands from going clammy on the wheel. You're tired, I told myself. Numbers look like other numbers when you're tired. Then a low-slung green sign slid into my beams. Exit 300 rest area. I almost laughed. The last rest area in that direction was past 290. I knew that because I'd used it on my way east 2 days prior, and I'd cursed the broken hand dryer like a personal rival. I took the exit because fear feels smaller when there's a place to park it. The ramp curved in an unnatural way, too tight, like the dot had designed it for go-karts. When the tires hit the concrete pad of the lot, the radio fizzed, then cut to static. I could see the building by low sodium lights, a rectangle with a bank of vending machines, an empty picnic area, those metal mesh trash cans that rattle in the wind. Everything looked clean, newer than it should, as if it had been installed yesterday and never used. My headlights threw long shadows across the pavement, and something about the angle of those shadows made my stomach turn. They were leaning toward the building, the way wheat leans before a storm. I killed the engine but left the lights. It was quiet enough to hear the ticking of hot metal settling in the hood. The wind had gone still. I told myself I'd stretch, use the restroom, and get back on the road. As soon as I opened the door, the smell hit me bleach. Heavy, hospital-grade bleach, the kind that crawls into your sinuses and convinces you of safety. The bathroom door creaked like it was trying hard not to. Inside, spotless tile, a mirror with a ghostly, wavering reflection because of the fluorescent hum. I went into a stall and noticed the detail that sat inside me like a splinter. The toilet seat was still raised, as if someone had just finished cleaning it and stepped away. Water ran in the far sink. That's what I heard when I unlatched the stall. Water, thin and steady, only. When I looked, the faucets weren't moving. There were droplets in the basin, fresh and perfect. I touched one. Cold, clean, real. I glanced at the exit and decided I'd wash my hands in the truck. My skin felt prickly, like the air had a charge. I pulled the door and met a woman coming in. She was mid-40s, hair in a tight ponytail, a trucker's jacket, and eyes that didn't quite match her smile. She nodded. Evenin'. Her voice had no echo, even with the hard walls. I stepped aside, muttered something polite, and watched her walk to the far stall. She didn't lock it. She didn't lower the seat. She didn't move at all. Her boots were visible under the door, pointed toward the wall, still as a staged photo. The radio in my truck popped back to life, a burst of AM chatter that made me jump. I forced myself to cross the lot. When I slid into the cab, I did what I always do when something small feels wrong. I tried to narrate it into being nothing. "Weird place," I said out loud. "New construction. Bleach smell. Lady's waiting her turn." Then I flicked my brights and checked the exit back to the highway. The ramp was there. Except the sign at its mouth, the green one, no longer read 2 I-10 East-West. It read mile marker 300, just that. No arrows. Behind me, the restroom door opened with a squeal-like feedback, and the woman stepped into the light. She looked wrong without moving. Some angle was off, maybe the tilt of her head, the way the ponytail lay too straight, like a drawn line. She raised an arm not to wave, but to point at my headlights, as if reminding me to turn them off. Except her finger pointed past them, into my windshield, into me. My chest cinched. I turned the key. The engine caught reluctantly, like it had been asleep too deeply. When I rolled forward, the steering felt heavier than it should. The ramp took me not to the interstate but along a frontage road I didn't recognize. The desert pressed close, crowding with yucca and shadow. A quarter mile on, the mile marker stood. 300. 10 feet later, another. 300. Another. Tipped in the dirt, its bolt holes raw. 300. It felt like standing between mirrors. I had the sudden, childish desire to hit the brakes and run back to the restroom building, where at least there were walls and the idea of other people. I didn't. I kept a steady 60 and watched the odometer count. Miles that didn't exist. I merged back onto the interstate without noticing when the frontage road turned. One moment I was boxed in by scrub and empty signs, and the next, taillights were sliding past, and the comfort of rules lanes, reflectors, predictable curves returned like a blanket. When the green signs came again, they made sense. Exit 273 Fort Stockton. My radio found a country station. I exhaled, tasted stale coffee and copper. I didn't stop again that night. The next morning, in the sun's honesty, I drove back to look for the rest area. I knew it was dumb, but I needed to see the building in daylight to undo whatever my brain had done. There was no exit at mile 300. There wasn't a mile 300 on that stretch at all. The markers ran 292, 291, 290, then skipped where construction had rerouted the lanes. A trooper saw me pulled over and slowed. I asked him casually, like a man passing time, if there'd been an old rest area out there. He thought, scratched his cheek, said there had been one shut down in the 90s after an incident he didn't get into. They bulldozed it, he said. People kept stopping anyway. He tipped his hat and told me to keep safe. Nighttime made folks see things. On my way back east that evening, I watched the numbers more closely than I've watched anything. They behaved. The sky stacked its colors in the same order. The wind found my straps and drummed the same lazy rhythm. But when darkness thickened and my headlights lifted the next green sign, the edges of the reflective letters glittered like something was written beneath them, scraped away but not erased. I turned my radio louder, took the next exit with other cars, then convinced myself for the 1000th time that Texas highways are long enough to grow their own ghosts. In my senior year at UT Permian Basin, I rented a one-bedroom behind the H-E-B off Pecan and 9th in Odessa. It was the kind of student place where the carpet had more memory than the lease, and the AC rattled like a bag of tools. My girlfriend, Alina, worked nights at a clinic and slept at my place after. So most mornings started with the soft shush of her keys and the smell of cheap coffee blooming from a thrifted Mr. Coffee. We kept a simple rhythm. I'd study until midnight. She'd text me at 2 a.m. when her shift slowed. I'd unlock the door, and she'd slip in around 3. If something is wrong with your ordinary, it takes days to admit it. It started with the window. There was a narrow one over the sink that faced the complex's interior walkway. The blinds were missing a slat, had been since I moved in, and every time someone walked past, a long white stripe of their motion would pattern across my wall. The first night I noticed anything, I was reading an anthropology paper, highlighter uncapped between my teeth, when that stripe flickered. I checked the time. 1:48 a.m. too early for Alina. I listened for footsteps. Only the Assis cough. I went to the window and tilted the blind enough to peek. The walkway was empty, the yellow safety lights buzzing with their warm, terrible sameness. At 2:07 a.m., my phone buzzed with Alina's "Slow now, unlocking." I thumbed the deadbolt and went back to the couch. The stripe flickered again, not like a body passing, but like someone standing and shifting their weight. I told myself not to be weird. We were ground floor. People had beer. People had arguments. People stood outside doors all the time. At 2:38 a.m., the lock lever moved a fraction, as if nudged. I called out, "Alina?" No answer. The lever settled back, not up or down, just relaxed like a muscle. When she arrived 20 minutes later, the lever slid all the way and she came in, hair smelling like dry shampoo and tiredness. I asked if she'd been here earlier. She blinked. "No, babe. I just clocked out." The second night, the stripe appeared in the kitchen again at 1:40. It stayed. Not flickering, stationary. The kind of stillness that becomes heavy, then becomes presence, then becomes a thing your body recognizes before your mind agrees. I texted the complex group chat 4 numbers I barely knew. "Yo, someone hanging outside the walkway?" No reply. I went to the peephole. The fisheye showed the same nothing it always shows, a bulged world, warped and harmless. When the lever twitched a second time, I put my hand on it. It was cool, not cold, not warm, human-less. By the fourth night, the ritual had developed its own shape. 1:45, the stripe. 2:07, Alina's text. 2:30, the lever's small test. I stopped telling her. Superstition grows around discomfort, and I didn't want to build a shrine to it. Instead, I set my phone to video and propped it against a salt canister on the counter, framing the door. If you've ever watched your life through your phone in real time, waiting for proof that reality is behaving, you know the specific ache of my jaw as I clenched it. On screen, nothing happened. On the door itself, the lever ticked. On the video, it did not. Sleep thinned out over the week. I began hearing the SC as if it were words almost forming, the refrigerator as if it were someone swallowing, the traffic on 9th like a crowd at the far end of a hallway. I cleaned more. I lined the shoes by the door, 10 toes pointing out. Thursday night, I taped a strand of hair from my head across the inside of the deadbolt, a trick I learned from a maintenance guy who checked if tenants were sneaking dogs in. If the door moved, the hair would break. Childish, but I needed a rule that belonged to me. At 2:12 a.m., my phone pinged with an email from the clinic. Alina's shift had gone late. She'd be closer to 4. I put the phone face down. The stripe painted my wall. Something thumped above, a neighbor turning in sleep. The lever lifted a whisper and stopped. The hair didn't break. Then, from the other side of the door, 3 soft scratches. Pause, 3 more. Cat scratches. Deliberate. I lifted the peephole cover and pressed my eye. Something in the lens warped the light into a shape that suggested a person. Not a face, not even a silhouette. A weight. My heart became a small, furious animal. I said, while my mouth tried not to shake, "Can I help you?" The scratches stopped. A woman's voice, not Alina, not anyone I knew, spoke as if to herself. "This is the right one." Not loud. Just certain. I didn't breathe. You read about these moments and think you'll be a hero or a fool. You never think you'll be perfect quiet. The voice moved away. Steps went past the window. The stripe slid and thinned. I waited 10 minutes, 20. I texted Alina, "Wait in the car when you get here. I'll come out to you." I stood in the dark, hand on the baseball bat behind the couch, and imagined all the ways an ordinary door is less a barrier than an agreement. When I finally slept, it was because the birds started and the AC stopped. Morning makes cowards brave. I went to the office and told them I thought someone was casing apartments. The manager grew professional eyebrows. "We'll have security do extra rounds." I considered telling her about the lever and the hair, about the video that lied, about the sentence that now lived in my kitchen like a stain. I didn't. People think you're inviting their stories when you tell yours. 2 nights later, Alina forgot her scrub top and came back to grab it. I was at my desk flipping through flashcards when she let herself in. The lever turned, clean and full. She stepped inside, a grin already forming the kind she wore when she surprised me mid-study. Her grin went strange. She shut the door behind her carefully, like keeping a draft out. "Who was just with you?" she asked. The question sat in the air, patient and awful. I shook my head. "No one. I just got here from the library." She pointed. The hair I'd taped was broken, 2 ends drifting in the AC gust. "Maybe the wind," I said, too quick. She set her scrub top on the counter and touched the deadbolt. It was turned when I tried it, like someone was locking me in or out. I had to jiggle it. We stood there, both of us pretending to solve it with logic, both of us knowing we were measuring something we couldn't see. We slept that night with the light on. The stripe appeared at 1:45 as if honoring the schedule. At 3:10, our bedroom door moved inward a half-inch on its own breath and settled. We lay rigid, backs pressed, and didn't speak. In the morning, I found the notebook I keep by the couch open to a blank page that had a single line pressed into it. Not written, but indented, like someone traced letters without ink. "This is the right one. We moved at semester's end." The AC at the new place hummed in an unremarkable key. The blinds had all their slats. Sometimes at night, when the hall light throws a narrow band across our wall, I catch my breath without meaning to. If you asked me why, I'd tell you that apartments remember. Not because of what happens in them, but because of what almost does. Last July, when the hill country had gone from green to the color of a nickel, I took my nephew Diego out to the state natural area near Bandera, because he'd been glued to his phone for weeks, and his mother asked if I could do an uncle thing. The creek there had dwindled to a series of blue-tinted puddles linked by damp rock, dragonflies moving like soundless helicopters. You could smell limestone and sunblock and the faint, almost sweet rot of wet leaves. We parked in a pullout and walked down a dusty slope toward a bend where live oaks threw a ragged shade. I made a game of it. First one to skip a rock 3 times. Didn't have to carry the cooler back. Diego is 12 and the way 12 is both small and enormous. He asked 1,000 questions. Why does the water look green? Do snakes live under rocks? Did I ever get lost here? And I answered with the confidence of adults who don't know but won't admit it. I told him once, as a kid, I dropped my watch in this creek. One of those plastic ones with a Velcro band and a face that lit up blue when you pressed a button. Did you find it? He asked. No, I said. I cried like a cartoon and made my dad promise the creek would give it back someday. He laughed, indulgent, like I'd made a dad joke on purpose. We had the bend to ourselves except for a pair of hikers upstream. The heat carried a weight that made everything slower, even the cicadas. We took off our shoes and walked the shallows. The water was ankle-cool and honest. Diego found a crawdad, eyes bright with a mix of triumph and kindness as he put it back. We settled on a ledge where the rock made a seat and I could pitch my best flat stones. 2 skips, sometimes 3, never 4. He got 1 good 3 and lorded it over me with all the grace of a champion. Around noon, a breeze unrolled down the creek and the live oaks ticked their leaves. We ate ham sandwiches with too much mustard and watched minnows shiver in place against the barely moving water. That's when Diego pointed and said, "Tio, what's that?" There, caught in the weeds near an exposed root, was a watch. Not the adult kind, plastic, blue. I felt a stupid lurch. There are 1,000 plastic watches, I told myself. That's how the world works. It repeats itself enough to fool you. But when I stepped into the water and freed it, the Velcro sucked at my fingers exactly the way memory said it would. It was the same model. The face lit slate blue when I pressed the button, though the numbers didn't appear, just a drowned glow. The band was intact except for a fuzz of algae at the edges. I wiped it against my shorts and smelled that specific distant mildew that lives in old pool toys. Diego, whose life hadn't yet taught him to doubt the strange, said, delighted, "It gave it back." He pawed it, examined the buckle, turned it over. On the back, scratched faint, were my initials the way I'd done as a kid, pressed with a safety pin. J.R. not neat. Not proof, either. There are a lot of JRS in Texas, but enough to make the world tilt a degree. I could have told him then about the day I lost it. My dad setting a folding chair in the shade. The soda bleeding cold through the plastic bag. My mother's voice oddly far across the water as if distance were another fluid. I could have told him how I cried, then stopped, then pretended to be brave. Instead, I said, with all the adult restraint in the world. He strapped it on and the band wrapped around his skinny wrist twice. "It's lucky," he said. It came back. On the walk to the truck, I tried rational paths. Someone else lost the same watch. I misremembered the exact spot. Time is messy. Coincidence is our brain's favorite candy. But the weight of the thing on the bench seat between us felt like a found answer, even if I didn't know the question. When we got home, I rinsed it in the sink, patted it dry, and set it on my dresser. That night, after Diego was asleep in the next room, I pressed the button in the dark and watched the blue come up like a submerged breath. Days went by. Small sounds accompanied the watch, only when the house was quiet. The dry, faint click of a second hand that wasn't moving. A tiny hiss as if air were escaping. Once, a tap like a finger testing glass. On the 4th night, at 2 a.m., I woke with the sensation that I'd been called by name, not loudly, but intimately. The house was all the usual shadows. The watch's face was lit without my touch. The blue wasn't slate now, but something warmer, greened at the edges the way creek water turns where it rests. I got out of bed and hovered over it like a thief caught halfway. The indentations of JR on the back were deeper than I remembered, as if the metal were softer than steel. I made myself laugh. "You're making meaning where there isn't any," I told myself out loud, like setting a rule. 2 evenings later, Diego came by to grab his phone charger. He'd taken to wearing the watch like a talisman. "It stopped glowing," he said, disappointed. He pressed the button and nothing happened. "Batteries," I said automatically, then caught myself. There weren't batteries in that kind of glow. "It's old," I added lamely. He shrugged it off, but as he left, he tapped the face against the doorframe, a kid habit to wake it up. The light fluttered, a tiny pulse. He didn't see it. I did. It felt like catching a lie you want very badly to be true. That weekend, we went back to the creek because you test things you love. The water had shrunk again, the bends becoming rooms instead of hallways. We walked farther upstream where the oaks thinned and the sun got honest. At a slot between slabs of rock, we found a pool deeper than it had any right to be, darkness in it like bruised glass. No swimming, I said reflexively. He nodded, respectful without knowing why. We sat. We waited. The air told us we were alone. Diego held the watch in both hands as if deciding. If we put it back, he said, do you think it returns something else? Like a trade? He meant luck, but the words gave me a chill that felt too big for July. Nah, I said. And then, because I'm an idiot sometimes, I added, only returns what it took. He looked at me hard, trying to understand what I didn't mean to say. I thought about the way my dad had stood under these same oaks decades ago, hands on hips, squinting at the water as if it were a stubborn friend. I thought about all the things the creek could take that weren't plastic. Let's go, I said, too brisk. We turned away. A sound came from the pool behind us then, not a splash exactly, more like something heavy adjusting itself underwater. We both froze. Ripples moved outward in a clean circle and lapped the rock at our feet. The ripples had weight, like they remembered where they'd been. Diego slid his fingers into mine without looking. After a time, the water smoothed itself and pretended ignorance. We didn't speak on the walk back. The watch didn't glow the rest of the summer. Sometimes at night I hear a tiny click from my dresser, like a second hand deciding. I won't take Diego back there for a while. I told my sister it's too hot and the droughts made the snakes bold. That's not the reason. The reason is simpler and more foolish. I promised something once to a creek, and it remembered me. I crewed nights on a workover rig outside Andrews, the kind of job where your hands learn what rope feels like with diesel on it and your clothes never really get clean. The company leased a patch beside a disused pump jack, and we parked our man camp trailers in an L so the wind wouldn't bully us every time we opened a door. If you've never seen the oil field at 3 a.m., it's a city of single lights. Each flare, each work lamp, each truck headlight writes its own story on the dark. You learn to read those lights. You learn which mean nothing, which mean keep clear, and which mean come see. Our light was bolted to a pole near the tool crib. It had a panel case and a sensor that knew to wake up when the sun went. One Tuesday in September, the sensor decided the sun was gone at noon and clicked the light on. No big deal. We ignored it. But at shift change, when the day crew pulled out and the night crew settled their thermoses, the light began a new habit, a slow pulse like a sleeping animal breathing. On, bright, down, dark, on again. We joked we had a heartbeat post. We joked until joking stopped helping. The first night of the pulse, we heard a radio scream that wasn't anyone's voice. Just feedback and a sound like a laugh cut in half. Rio slammed the handheld down and said some words in Spanish that made the roughnecks grin. The second night, the tool crib door was open when no one had touched it, and the acetylene regulator lay on the floor with a dent like a thumbprint. The third night, something parked 100 yards out, no engine sound, no headlights, just a rectangle of deeper dark. We stood with our hands on our hips, not because it helped, but because it's the pose men take when they want to pretend they're not scared. You seeing that? Martinez asked. Yeah. The light breathed behind us. I could feel its rhythm on my neck. Sometimes you sense light on your skin the way you sense heat. The rectangle stayed. Then it didn't. Later, when we reviewed the little motion camera that watched the yard, it showed nothing where we were all looking. Just our cluster of men, our stiff shoulders, our breath fogging a little in a windless air. On the fourth night, the light stopped pulsing and came on hard. It threw our shadows out long, snapped bugs into frenzies, and made the pump jack look like a praying thing. Finally, Rio said, triumphant as if he'd argued with it and won. To celebrate, he lit a cigarette behind the tool crib where the wind curled slow. Put that out, I told him. He rolled his eyes. He stepped into the shadow at the pole's base. That's not. Right, Martinez said. I looked. The shadow thrown by the pole should have been a narrow triangle on the ground and up the crib side. It was wider, and it didn't line up with the pole. It leaned left like a man listening. I walked toward it. A stupid bravery that had me hearing my father's voice. Curiosity will put your hand where it doesn't belong. The closer I got, the colder the air turned, as if the night had drawn a boundary and chilled it. I stuck my hand into the shadow. It was not dark. It was wrong. It felt like sticking your hand into a bucket of water that's almost frozen but not. A thickness, a resistance, a patience. "Pull it out," Martinez said. His voice bent much higher than he meant. I pulled it out. My skin felt the way it does when you come inside after carrying groceries in sleet, raw, too awake. I laughed because men laugh when their bodies tell them something they will not say out loud. Rio stubbed his cigarette, crushed it too hard, as if proving his compliance to the air. That night I dreamed of the light before I worked there. It lit up a different yard. Men I didn't know walked around it with grease on their forearms. Someone argued, someone cried shocked, private tears, and someone else said, kindly and flat, "It wasn't your fault." I woke to the pole's rhythm buzzing in my teeth. The light was on, steady, and the yard looked normal. I kept that dream to myself. On the sixth night, a new guy named Hal tripped on the hose near the pole and cracked his forehead on the concrete pad. Not a bad cut, but messy. Blood has a smell you can only call iron because there's no better word. We wrapped him, sat him on the cooler, and called the night medic. While we waited, the light above us flared bright enough to wash out the sky, and for a second I couldn't see stars. Hal said, dazed, "Don't let it go off, please, don't let it." He stared at the shadow pooled at the pole's base. When we asked him what he meant, he shook his head, then later claimed he didn't remember saying anything at all. The medic came and took him for stitches. We watched their taillights leave little red commas in the dark. A warmer wind kicked up from the southeast and the whole yard smelled like the faraway refinery suite, nauseating. We knocked off early on the logic that tired men make mistakes. I drew the short straw to lock the tool crib. When I swung the door, something knocked back from inside. A simple, unmistakable rap. Not a rattle. Not settling metal. A knock. I froze, hand still on the latch, and listened. A second knock, same rhythm. Without thinking, I knocked back. Two quick, one slow. The silence that followed became a shape I could almost see. I stood stupid, door half open. The light bathing the world enough that nothing could hide, and yet everything did. After a moment, I shut the crib and spun the lock harder than required. I did not tell anyone about the knocks. The next afternoon, day crew called to say the pole light was on under full sun again. "Sensors busted," the foreman grumbled. He said he'd put in a ticket. That night, the light didn't come on at all. The yard was black, and our portable lamps made small circles on dirt. The shadow at the pole's foot was there anyway, darker than the dark around it. We trained a lamp on it. The beam didn't brighten it. The beam slid around it like a river around a rock. "Enough," Martinez said, a thin brave. He walked to the pole and stepped into its shadow. He didn't vanish. He didn't scream. He stood there with his jaw set and his hands balled. "Cold," he said, teeth chattering even though the wind had gone thick warm again. He stepped out. It's like standing in the walk-in at the shop, but wet." He said wet the way a man would say a word he didn't want on his tongue. We finished the job a week later. The ticket for the light never got filled. The pole stayed. The sensor stayed stubborn in its belief about the sun. On my last night on that patch, I walked out before clocking in and stood looking at the pump jack silhouette against a flat horizon. The pole shadow lay like a pet at its master's feet. I nearly stepped in, then didn't. Not from fear exactly, but from a respect that tasted like fear's older cousin. If you ask me today what I think that light is doing, I'd say it's remembering. I'd say it's keeping time for someone who counted seconds until the counting stopped and left the rest to us. We learn to read lights. We also learn which ones are reading us back. My cousin Lydia married into a family with a ranch south of Cotulla, a stretch of mesquite and hizaki punctured by pump jacks and held together by rusted fence. Every Thanksgiving, the older men woke before the sun, drank coffee too strong for human law, and argued about deer stands nobody had maintained since the Bush years. I preferred the late afternoon walks, the hour when the sky went the pale gold of beer and the brush cooled just enough to breathe again. 2 years ago, I took one of those walks alone and found a gate that shouldn't have been there. It was set into the perimeter fence far from any road. A welded rectangle of pipe with chain link like everyone uses, only newer, shinier, as if it had been replaced yesterday. The barbed wire to either side sagged with honest age. The gate stood straight and clean, the padlock shiny and unscarred. On our side, the sandy two-track ended in weeds, no tire cuts, no boot scuffs. On the other side, mesquite and prickly pear and the dim suggestion of a game trail. I don't know why I touched it. Curiosity, sure. The top bar was warm from the day. The padlock was cool, heavy, a comfort. I rattled it like a man pretending he has business. "It's new," Lydia's husband said when I told him over turkey. "We didn't put it. Neighbor must have. I'll call him." He didn't, because family, because football, because it was easy to forget a thing that wasn't where you needed it to be. The next afternoon I went back. The padlock was on the other side of the gate. There are explanations that come dressed like answers. Maybe someone swapped it. Maybe the neighbor came through and locked it the other way. Maybe. But you know the feel of your own hand on metal, the particular weight of an object you just met. It had been on our side. Now it wasn't. The sun sat lower and the brush hummed with insects that make the sound of electricity. I reached between the chain-link diamonds and pushed the lock with a finger. It swung back, pendulum slow, and tapped the pipe with a polite tick. That night, wind woke the house. It had the tone of a wind that changes seasons. The camp house rattled and settled, and the hallway light made a river on the tile. I dreamed that the gate stood in the living room and the padlock breathed like a sleeping dog. In the morning, Lydia asked if I'd heard boots on the porch around 3. No, I lied. We all lie about small things to keep bigger ones at bay. On the 3rd day, I took wire cutters because ritual requires props. I walked the fence line and found the gate where I'd left it, still bright in its dumb newness. The padlock hung on the far side. I slid my cutters through the chain link, a bad idea that felt like a good one. When metal bites metal, the sound is uglier than you want. I made a clean opening big enough to step through. On the other side, the air smelled less like dust and more like rain, despite there being none. I stood with one foot in each place and felt a pressure like a promise. "Okay," I said to the open country, like a man humoring a child. "Okay." I walked 10 yards past the gate and turned around. From that angle, the ranch house wasn't visible, screened by brush and the low roll of the land. The gate itself looked less new from this side. The chain link had a mottled darkness, the pipe a hint of orange at the welds. The padlock, a cheap brand in sharp new chrome, seemed older here, edges scuffed, notched. I stepped back through my cut and sealed it sloppily with the tie wire I'd brought. Ashamed of myself the way you feel after you've broken a thing you cannot fix, that evening. Lydia's husband asked if I'd moved a mineral lick because the trail cam got nothing where he expected. We looked at the photos together on his phone deer, hogs, a stray dog with a ratty tail, then a run of black frames with the date stamp wrong by 12 hours. "Battery," he said. "Cold can mess the clock." It was 75 degrees and dropping. We turned the game on, We ate pie. People laughed like families do when they're keeping the dark in its place with sugar and noise. When I couldn't sleep, I took the small flashlight from the junk drawer and went to the porch. The wind had flattened. The stars poured. The ranch carries sound in a way city ears forget. I could hear a distant pump jack, a whine like an old bicycle, and the closer, more intimate noises of night animals living their attentive lives. I walked the Kalish Road until I met the fence and followed it with the beam trained at my boots because looking too far ahead invites more than you want. The gate appeared in my circle of light like a friend on a street you didn't expect them. The padlock was back on our side. I didn't put my hand on it. I said, as if to a person, "I'll leave you alone." The metal didn't answer because metal never does, but something in the brush shifted its weight, a body moving from one foot to the other. Not an animal weight, a human one. The sound was so ordinary I almost called out hello. Instead, I stood and counted in my head to a number I'd picked as a kid to call myself 73, and then I walked back without rushing because rushing tells the night you know in the morning. Lydia's youngest found one of the kitchen chairs pushed against the back door, as if someone had used it to look out the window at the yard. There were scuffs on the tile we couldn't match to anyone's shoes. We made jokes about raccoons with union cards. We did not talk about the gate. I haven't been back since. Thanksgiving moved to her sister's place in town after some family fracture that had nothing to do with fences. I think about that gate when I see chain link in unexpected places around cell towers, behind schools, at parks where the city forgot to cut the grass. Gates suggest an understanding, that there is a here and a there, and that we agree how to move between. Sometimes in Texas, those agreements get made without us. Sometimes they're new and shiny and hung with the promise of control. Sometimes the lock changes sides when you're not looking. If you ask me what I think was on the other side, I'll say land and brush and deer and nothing more. I'll say that because it's true enough to sleep. But when wind rattles the windows at 3 and the tile shines like water, I count to 73 and keep my feet on my side of whatever's asking.